composMV20 ventilator unit is supplied with an AC power supply cable and main gas supply tubing. A blender is required to mix the air supply with oxygen. Supply lines will be required to deliver for air and oxygen to the blender. The patient set is comprised of the patient circuit, which is the large diameter grey tube, the Jackson-Rees tube, which is the clear thin tube, and the humidification and moisture exchange filter. With the ventilator switched off and no external connections, connect the air supply to the rear of the main unit. The air's flow and pressure are regulated inside the main unit and then injected into the patient circuit, providing the driving force for each breath by the patient. Connect the AC power cable and secure in place using the retainer to prevent accidental removal. Attach the patient circuit and the pressure monitor tube to the main unit here. This is to monitor the pressure and is necessary for pressure control. For each mechanical breath, air is pushed into the patient circuit from this port for the inspiration phase. Then, in the exhalation phase, air will return down the patient circuit and be emitted from the exhaust port on the back of the main unit. The compressed air and oxygen supply line should be attached to the oxygen blender. Next, we attach the Jackson-Rees tube to the blender and then to the patient circuit. This tube takes blended gas from the blender to the patient circuit. Once the ventilator is switched on, a constant flow of air is required from the blender to the patient circuit. A humidification and moisture exchange filter should be fitted. Attach the proximal end of the patient circuit to a test lung. For each breath by the patient, there is a volume of gas already in the patient circuit, which has been supplied from the blender through the Jackson-Rees tube at a constant flow. Switch on the unit to mandatory ventilation mode. The main unit launches a jet of pressure into the patient's circuit from this outlet, pushing the volume of blended air into the patient's airways, opening the lungs. When the set pressure is reached and the set inspiration time is complete, the main unit will release its pressure. The air in the patient's lungs will naturally flow back into the patient's circuit, back to the main unit, and out of the exhaust port on the rear of the unit. Connecting a scavenger system or other device to the exhaust port is recommended because it could contain a heavy load of the coronavirus. During this exhalation phase, the constant flow of blended air from the Jackson-Rees tube will push the exhaled air out from the patient's circuit, replenishing the volume of air in the circuit ready for the next breath. This unit has an alarm for the gas that is coming through the main unit, but not for the gas that is being supplied by the blender. Ventilation mode. At the front right-hand side of the unit are three monitored outputs: tidal volume, PIP, and PEEP. These monitored outputs are available in any ventilation mode. There are 4 settings available under the mandatory ventilation mode and 1 further setting on the backup mode. In mandatory ventilation mode, you can set the PIP, the PEEP, the breath rate, and the inspiration time, depending upon the patient's condition. Every breath will be mandatory based on the setting. In backup ventilation mode, the patient breathes spontaneously unless they suffer from an apnea. The apnea alarm time, which means the patient has stopped breathing, is set here. When apnea is detected, the ventilator will automatically switch to mandatory ventilation. Backup ventilation will automatically begin if the patient fails to breathe for longer than the apnea set time, which has been set at 10 seconds when an audible alarm will sound together with a red warning light here. If the patient starts spontaneous breathing again, the mandatory ventilation will stop and the patient will be allowed to breathe spontaneously until another apnea is detected.